Hi, I'm Jim Knotts, President and CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Welcome to today's virtual reading of the names. 2022 marks the 40th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. As part of our commemoration, we'll host an in-person reading of the names at the wall from November 7th through 10th, 2022, when all 58,281 names on the wall will be read aloud. In the lead up to that event, we'll be reading names each day online while sharing the photos of these heroes. For our daily virtual reading, the names of the service members will be read by month and day of death between the years 1956 and 1975 in alphabetical order for the given day. We apologize in advance for any mispronunciations. Know that our readers are doing their best to honor these service members. We hope you'll listen and watch each day and share with others as we remember and honor those who gave their lives during the Vietnam War.
James Patrick Alexander, David Bruce Anderson, Louis Eugene Avery, Douglas Grant Bailey, Kenneth Norman Bailey Jr., William Marcus Barscoe, Stephen Edwin Belcher, Carl Robert Berbert, Walter John Bernreuter, Vance Allen Berry, Thomas Emmanuel Best, Lawrence Carroll Bigelow, Chester Bobb, William Edward Boone IV, David Russell Borzik, Glenn Truman Bristow, James Albert Brock, Willard Brookins Jr., Louis Brown, James William Brown, Andrew Zbigniew Bukior, Brian Leroy Bucher, David Lee Burnett, Guy Albert Bird, Paul Philip Cabe, Paul Matthew Cahill, John Frank Candelas, James Anthony Cardinale, Clarence Jasper Carson Jr., Harold Leroy Carver, Herman Chaparro Villanueva, Peter Yazzie Claw, Donald Leo Klein, Charles Michael Cobb, Jonathan Collins III, Thomas Eugene Combs, Patrick J. Conroy, Robert Francis Cote, Rex Lee Craig, Larry Raymond Creasy, Curtis Henry Cropper, Michael Ray Cunene, Ernest Brian Cupp, Stephen Arthur Daniel, Elijah Lamar Davis, Frank DeMarkey Jr., Lance Aaron DeRue, Alan James Dean, Ray Glenn Desmond, Stephen Ellis Donaldson, Lawrence Wesley Dudley Jr., George Edward Eden, John Newt Edwards, Leonard Wayne Ely, Jimmy Lewis Ellerby, Kenneth Estes, Gary James Fiedler, Ronald James Fitch, David Bartlett Fitzgerald, Jimmy Lee Forrest, Joseph Ralph Foss, James Harrell Fowler, David Hercliffe Gamboa Jr., William Stanley Geary,
Eugene Paul Gee, Barney McKinley Giles Jr., Robert Edward Gertsch, Arthur Glass, Raymond Charles Graver Jr., Raymond Miller Green, Cephas Griffin Jr., Bert Guerra III, Alan Russell Guyman, Douglas Ray Harp, Donald Augustus Harrell, Robert John Harris, Paul Leroy Harrison, John Charles Havlick, John Russell Hendricks, Hugh Gilbert Hill Jr., Carl E. Hosnender, Olin Joseph Howe, Stephen James Hubert, Lars Peter Hustad, Marion Ray Hutchins, George Jackson Hyatt, Wayne Lee Isaacs, Kenneth Robert Jamerson, Keith Walter Kaufman, William Patrick Kelly, Kenneth Martin Kessinger, Burley Darrell Kirikoff, Ernest Alfonso Lang, Calvin Jerome Layton, Paul Raymond Lehayer, Richard Tyrone Lavelle, William Marvin Light, Alfred George Lira, Robert Chagoya Lira, Robert Lockett, Jr., James Arthur Lew, Willie Lee Lowe, William Lee Lowry, Harold Wayne Lothar, Daniel James Mack, Jerry Wayne Manning, Eddie Lester Marshall, Jerry Wayne Martin, Isidro Martinez, Rafael Martinez Santiago, Donald John Matocha, Philip Reginald Matracion, Lawrence McCrae, William Clayton McDowell, Douglas Dwayne McMahon, Mikola Melnick, Nathaniel Merriweather, Stephen Mikulski, Leonard Irvin Moore, Charles Herbert Neal Jr., Leroy Noley, Clarence Joseph Novak, Walter Michael Ostapchuk, Islam Osger, Thomas Aquinas Parker, Daniel Gary Patrick, Booker T. Patterson Jr., James Alexander Pemberton,
Richard Wayne Perdue, Burton W. Peterson, Jr., Robert Harold Pettit, Boyce Dean Phillips, John Robert Pierini, Robert William Reed, Charlie Reed, Jr., Larry Allen Reynolds, Gary Arthur Rhodes, Larry Reek Reekin, Kenneth Ray Roberts, Paul David Rodriguez, John Willard Rohr, Chester Earl Rowe, Jr., Charles Lowell Salter, Carlos J. Sanchez, Ronald Russell Schneidt, Michael Monroe Scott, Joseph Allen Scruggs, Brooke McKay Shadburn, Andrew Michael Simcoe, James L. Slade, Jr., James Allen Slagle, Norman Eugene Small, Paul Allen Smith, Walter Morrell Sneed, Henry Mershon Spingler III, Wesley William Sperling, Chuck Michael Stedell, Kendall Albert Stake, Edward Milton Stanchek, Paul Henry Stein, Jr., George Thomas Subert, John Philip Supple, Harold Lee Talley, Paul Edward Thomas, Robert R. Thompson, David William Tim, Richard Topritz, Stephen Michael Torrey, Bruce Tortorici, Douglas Lee Vandevecht, Harry Edward Wagner, Winston Charles Walker, Roger Elgin Ward, Franklin Floyd Weaver, Scott Terry Welburn, Frederick Anthony Wentz, Michael Lee Wortman, Tommy Lee White, Joseph Pierce Williams, Richard Earl Williams, Charles Carl Windler, Jr., Joe Allen Whitcup, Arnold Woodson, Fred Young, Leland Dale Zahn,